corrupt and incompetent politicians, including its current leadership, have rendered the country into a failed state. Iraq is highly dysfunctional, and let's not fool ourselves. The country is on the verge of fragmentation. The political crisis just over these past days underscore how fragile Iraq is and how important it is for the international community to adapt its approach so it is reality-based. Hope and wishful thinking do not represent an effective policy. The 2005 Constitution was already a compromise for the Iraqi Kurds. But frankly, Baghdad never fulfilled its end of the bargain, even depriving the Kurds of the allocation of funds from the central government. This was always a problem. Baghdad never fulfilled its commitment in allocating the full 17%. So we've heard from President Massoud Barzani repeatedly over the years about Iraqi Kurdistan's move towards independence. And I applaud the national aspirations of Iraqi Kurds. In my view, it would correct a historical injustice. Independence is an ultimate and just outcome. But independence isn't something that you dream about or you talk about. Independence is something that you have to act on. So President Barzani has said that there would be a referendum on independence in September or October, coincidentally just before the US presidential election. He believes that the referendum would establish a legal, popular, and international legitimacy for Iraqi Kurdistan's future independence. If there is a referendum on independence, it should and must include Kirkuk Governorate and other so-called disputed territories in Nineveh and Diyala provinces. Everybody must vote, including Arabs, Turkmen, and Christians. The vote should be counted on a district and sub-district level so that they most accurately reflect the local populations. Kirkuk is home now to 600,000 IDPs. Iraqi Kurdistan as a whole has 1.8 million IDPs. We applaud the hospitality and sanctuary that's been provided to these people. We hope that the conditions will exist soon of security so they can go back to their homes. But these persons should not be allowed to vote. The referendum that President Barzani has proposed will start a political and legal process culminating in a declaration of independence. I propose that from the date of the referendum, the KRG allow 1 year. During this year, it would negotiate a friendly divorce with Baghdad. It would also negotiate a modus vivendi with other neighboring states. Hopefully there can be agreements reached that would be a win-win for everyone. But if that's not the case, that shouldn't dissuade the KRG from declaring its independence 1 year after the referendum. Independence is not just a declaration. Independence also requires a systematic effort at state building. We've heard earlier about the need for a constitution in Iraqi Kurdistan. Well, that constitutional committee should intensify its work. The constitution should be prepared. It should include a Bill of Rights. And importantly, the constitution should meet and exceed the highest international standards for linguistic, religious, ethnic, and national minority rights. And I'm sure Catherine Porter would agree with me, it should also include the highest standards for women's rights. Based on their historical experience, Iraqi Kurds know what it's like to be an oppressed minority. Based on this knowledge, Iraqi Kurdistan must do its utmost to protect and promote the rights of minorities. The Constitution should include arrangements for special local autonomy encompassing parts of Kirkuk City and other territories of Kirkuk, Diyala, and Nineveh provinces. Should the people in those areas actually vote for independence, which I'm quite certain they would, given the alternatives of remaining a part of Iraq, which is a failed and violent place. The Yazidis should be given special consideration, special dispensation for local autonomy in recognition of their uniqueness and also the special suffering that they have experienced. So when we speak about local autonomy, what does that mean? It refers to a local executive, a legislature, and a judiciary. Local police should be drawn from the communities where they serve, so they're fully integrated into a broader security objective. Economic autonomy can encompass the development of natural resources, the right to tax and raise revenue, also the development of natural resources, trade, employment, and land ownership. The third leg of autonomy involves cultural issues. Cultural autonomy includes language, education, religious matters, symbols, and cultural identity. As Iraqi Kurdistan moves towards independence, it needs to enshrine these principles of self-governance, not only for Iraqi Kurdistan as a whole, but for the minorities and groups within Iraq, including the Yazidis, who deserve and require special arrangements. So let me turn my remarks now to the situation in Syria. Similar to Iraq, the root cause of Syria's civil war has been the concentration of power, in this case by a minority-led Alawite and Ba'athist administration. For Syria, peace can be achieved through what is referred to by the PYD as democratic autonomy and self-governance. I want to state very clearly, as I've published, that I endorse a federal system for Rojava and northern Syria. The proposal is not disruptive. In fact, it's forward-leaning and groundbreaking, and it can contribute constructively to Syria's political transition. I want to applaud the PYD for working cooperatively with other sectarian and non-Kurdish groups to establish a de facto autonomous and self-governing region which provides services and security. This principle of self-government is based on the belief in a grassroots democracy, on gender equality and environmental sustainability. Policymakers in Washington and other capitals may want to deny its existence, but we all know here that Rojava is a reality. We also want to pay tribute to the People's Protection Forces. The YPG is the point of the spear fighting ISIS. We heard that from the participants in our earlier panel. They will soon establish a contiguous territory in Rojava, spanning the provinces of Jazeera, Kobani, and Afrin, by connecting Jarablus and Azaz. This represents a critical strategic turning point in Syria's civil war, because the security belt will prevent fighters and weapons from Turkey to reach Raqqa. It will further tighten the noose around the Islamic State headquarters. Washington should make no mistake about it. The civil war in Syria does not end unless the YPG receives additional support in the form of weapons and warplanes. And there can be no effective and stable governance in the future unless there is a decentralized system of constitutional power sharing. The proposal for federalism is suitable. We've all placed great hopes in Geneva III, but we also have to be steely-eyed in our appraisal. International mediation for Syria is failing because the UN mediator, Staffan de Mistura, by the way, who I know well and hold in very high regard, has decided to delay discussion about substantive issues and exclude from the negotiations real actors on the ground like the PYD. Stakeholders need to envision how decentralization will help them coexist in the future. The proposed federal system for Rojava and northern Syria shows the way. There can be no peace without the Syrian Kurds, And the UN's decision to exclude the PYD from the Geneva process is a big mistake. The UN must not succumb to pressure from Turkey to exclude the PYD. And the US, which knows full well that the PYD is its ally, should stand in support and oppose efforts by Turkey to exclude the PYD from the negotiating table. So on the subject of Turkey, Turkey worries that federalism in Syria will further inspire demands for Kurds in Turkey for democratic autonomy. Well, I support the concept of people's assemblies as a bottom-up form of democratization. This is not to replace the existing federal or central government structures. It can complement it. It can also serve as an effective tool for monitoring the performance of the official structures, so that if there are abuses, either security abuses or failure to deliver services, the people's assemblies can call it out. It can act at a community level to improve it. It can also address the international community so we are fully and better informed about what's actually happening in Turkey. For years, Turkish officials wouldn't even use the term Iraqi Kurdistan. They came up with all kinds of twisted references. The Kurdish region of Iraq is one example. But they finally came around to accept the reality of an Iraqi Kurdistan. In the same way, Ankara should cooperate with Rojava instead of launching artillery attacks against the YPG. I suspect during their brief minutes together during the Security Summit, President Obama made that point clearly to President Erdogan. The U.S. should not tolerate Turkey launching artillery strikes against our allies on the ground who are effectively advancing the multinational coalition's interests in defeating and degrading and destroying ISIS. If Turkey is attacking them, then Turkey must surely be an ally of ISIS. It's time for a reckoning. It's time for speaking truth to power and for calling out Turkey's policies that have been detrimental to the international community's goals. Over the years, I got to know Marty Ahtisaari, who is the Nobel Peace Prize recipient and the UN Special Mediator for Kosovo. He said of Slobodan Milosevic, Serbia lost its right to govern Kosovo because it consistently abused the basic rights of Kosovars. Well, the same can be said for President Erdogan in Turkey. Turkish Kurds have a legitimate demand for greater political and cultural rights. Turkey will lose its legitimacy to govern in the southeast of its country unless it accommodates the will and aspirations of its citizens. I watched with great concern the attacks that were perpetrated on a consistent basis by Turkish security forces against civilians in places like Cizre. And I publicly called for Turkey to launch a special investigation to hold those who committed those crimes against humanity accountable. If Turkey is unwilling or unable to investigate crimes committed by its own security forces, I'll be finishing soon, then the UN should launch a special commission of inquiry in order to uncover the facts and ultimately refer the case to the UN human rights mechanisms. I've spoken with Prince Zayed, who is the lead official at the UN Human Rights Council. He made some very robust statements about the attacks in Cizre when they occurred. I hope that he will continue to raise these kinds of concerns. It's important to know the exact conditions on the ground, so I propose that members of the US Congress and members of the European Parliament would compose a joint ad hoc commission of fact-finding on war crimes in Turkey and visit the region. I hope that they would be invited by members of Parliament for that purpose. We know there's no military solution to the problem in Turkey. In fact, the sides have been fighting for decades, and there has been no progress, most recently because of the decision by President Erdogan to attack the Kurds without provocation. Turkey must democratize and decentralize. It should negotiate with the HDP and specifically with the co-chairman Selahattin Demirtas, who will address this assembly later today. It's important that U.S. officials, European officials, members of Congress, and members of the European Parliament express publicly their concern about threats committed against the HDP to lift their diplomatic immunity as members of Parliament and threaten to bring them to trial. Already the rule of law and the administration of justice in Turkey is highly questionable. Any efforts to prosecute HDP parliamentarians will further bury Turkey as anti-democratic and authoritarian. So the U.S. has a national interest in seeing all these things happen. It should look at the region and these countries in a balanced way, but also through a Kurdish lens. It wants to see stability and democracy and peace wherever Kurds reside. And there's a fundamental lesson to be drawn from this period in history. The U.S. has bent over backwards to try to placate its adversaries instead of fully supporting its friends. And its friends are the Kurds in Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. There's an adage, which you all know, that the Kurds have no friend but the mountains. Well, today, in these countries, the United States has no better friend than the Kurds. And instead of talking about it, we should start acting upon it. The decision and announcement by Ash Carter is a good step in the right direction. Let's consolidate that with additional security assistance and political and diplomatic support. That would make us proud of the United States. It would make us more safe and secure as Kurds, our friends, and our allies. So I thank you all for your attention. I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips, for your scholarly analytical speech, indeed. Now the turn goes to Lucy, please.
Dear friends, thank you for this opportunity to speak out loud a little bit about Yazidis. So I will bring just numbers and ask, what is the future of existence? In the event of August 3rd, 2014, so-called Islamic State, or ISIS, murdered more than 5,000 Yazidis, adopted 6,500 and sold over 4,500 Yazidi women and girls into sexual slavery. Over 186,000 children have been displaced. At that time, over 150,000 went to Kurdish regional government, and more than 250,000 Yazidis were trapped on the Mount Sinjar, where hundreds of Yazidis found their death in starvation and hunger. Donatella Rivera, Amnesty International Senior Crisis Response Advisor, says, many of those held as sexual slaves are children, girls aged 14 and 15 years old, or even younger. ISIS fighters are using rape as a weapon in attacks to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Yazidi women and girls have been forcibly married, sold, or given as gifts to ISIS fighters and supporters, and are often forced to convert ISIS doctrine. Many girls have committed suicide. Yazidi boys are held at military training camps in Raqqa, Syria, the capital of the ISIS Caliphate. Boys between the age of 8 and 15 are given to military training and forced to watch the decapitations. In quotes, this is your initiation to jihad. They are told, you are an Islamic State boy now. On March 17, 2016, Secretary of State John Kerry says that the United States has determined that ISIS action against Yazidi and other minority groups in Iraq and Syria constitutes genocide. Kerry said that in 2014, ISIS raped Yazidi, killed them, enslaved thousands of Yazidi women and girls, selling them at auctions, raping them at will, and destroying the community in which they have lived for countless generations. We Yazidi are deeply appreciate the recognition of the genocide, the first out of the 74th. Now, I will bring my thoughts to the distinguished audience. Talking about coexistence in the Middle East, you can never skip the Yazidi topic. And here is why. In the last 7 centuries, the number of Yazidis from 20 million went down to less than 1 million today. Only in 18th century, Yazidi went through 15 genocides. And today, ISIS actually stated in their public documents that God will hold Muslims accountable for allowing the Yazidi to have remained in the Middle East for this long. The recognition of the genocide is great, but what is the next step? Do we have any specific law that will protect Yazidi and other minority in that region? How deep the international community is involved or dedicated to save Yazidis in Muslim regions? Do Yazidi have a future in that region? Hundreds of Yazidi found their death in Mediterranean Sea in order to seek the safe haven for themselves in Europe. I was at the conference organized by Washington Institute for Near East Policy. One of the participants who introduced himself from Iraqi military stated that Yazidi believe in evil. I wasn't surprised. His statement may be very meaningless here in America, but in Middle East, it has totally different reality. For instance, a few weeks ago, Yazidi soldier in Armenia was beheaded in Azerbaijan and Artsakh 4-day war attack. So that raised another question, how safe it is to be a Yazidi in the modern world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lucy Osuyan. Now we will have a speech from Mr. Khalaf Saleh Faris Ali, which would be read by Mr. Erdan Mitani. Mr. Mitani, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'd like to thank you for giving us this precious chance to be a voice for our people. It would have been an honor for me to attend the conference and deliver my message in person, but unfortunately our passports have been confiscated by the security forces of Kurdistan Democratic Party led by Mr. Barzani. And that's why we could not attend the conference. The minorities in the Middle East have been disenfranchised and have been suffering for a long time. Evidenced by the massacres they have been subjugated to, the last massacre was Islamic State's genocide against Yazidis and other minority groups in North Iraq. Today, these minorities in the area are under the risk of extermination because those who are responsible for their protection do not protect them, unless it aligns with their short-term interests, as the terrible events that happened to Yazidis in Shangal on August 3rd, 2014 showed. We are a minority facing genocide. Thousands of our women, children were taken as captives, sold into slavery. Our people were butchered and thrown into tens of mass graves. After the failure of the Iraqi government and Kurdistan regional government to protect and defend us for a few hours, we see it as our right to head to the international community and ask them to stand on our side and support us until we get our political, administrative, economic, security, social, cultural rights according to the Iraqi constitution and international laws and charters. we are in complete awareness that if we are not responsible for our security and administration, we cannot live in our homeland freely. This request of ours should be under international protection because the Yazidis lost the trust in Peshmerga after they left hundreds of thousands of civilians helpless to ISIL on 3rd of August 2014. In the light of this, we formed the Shangal Resistance Units, YBS, and Shangal Women Units, and these forces are now part of the Iraqi Armed Forces. Our forces have a great role to prevent the mercenaries of Islamic State to climb the mountain Sinjar, in which thousands of Yazidis live, as well as in securing the liberation of Shangal and the areas around it. The duty of YBS and YJS is to protect Shangal and its people. Also, we formed a self-administration council from the people who stayed in the Sinjar mountain and fought ISIL. The aim of the council is to be starting point for self-governance in Shangal. According to Federal Constitution of Iraq, so on 14th of January 2015, a conference was held and 27 members, including men and women, taking gender equality as a basis, were elected and divided into 6 committees. These are diplomatic, security, youth, women's affairs, service, and financial committees. The council is able to deliver food and other services to the people who live in Sinjar Mountain and around it monthly in coordination with the government of Al Jazeera Canton, which is Rojava government. Our council takes pluralism, secularism, democracy, and coexistence as a basis. During this short period of time, the Self-Administration Council was able to build good diplomatic relations with Iraqi government and other countries, as well as international organizations. On behalf of the Council and the Yazidi people who stayed on the Sinjar Mountain since August 3rd, 2014, we plead to the United States of America, United Nations, and the European Union the following. 1, doing more to liberate the kidnapped Yazidis and rehabilitate them. 2, recognizing what happened to Yazidis on 3rd of August 2014 as a genocide and urging the United Nations to ask the International Criminal Court to open an investigation on the case, especially after the resolution of EU February 4th, 2016, the recognition of American Congress on March 14, 2016, as well as the State Department on March 17, 2016, and the recognition of the case by the British Parliament on April 14, 2016. Third, as Shangal resistance units are an Iraqi force, we plead to the USA to train and supply this force in coordination with Iraqi government as they do in other parts of Iraq, supporting the religious minorities in North Iraq to get their political, administrative, economic, social, cultural, and educational rights in federal Iraq. This is according to the Articles 116, 119, 120, and 121 of Iraqi Constitution, and is also according to the United Nations Charter, Chapter 11, Article 73 and 76. 5, providing an international protection for the Nineveh Plain and Shangal. 6, encouraging international companies to participate in reconstruction of Shangal. 7, coaching the political parties in Shangal to not use the Yazidi issue for their political interest, but their efforts together for Yazidi people and help them. 8, bringing the perpetrators of the Yazidi genocide to justice. Khalif Saleh, Director of External Relations, Self-Administrative Council of Shangal. Thank you.
Once again, thank you, Dr. Phillips, for your analytical speech. Indeed, Ms. Osoyan, for your short and sweet speech. and Mr. Khalaf's informative speech read by Mr. Mitani. Now we have about 15 minutes for Q&A session. If you would please raise your hand so we can get your name and answer whatever question you have. Dr. Rahmani, Mr. Kurdi, name please. Arnashian, Sanashian, Fanashian. Jahan. One more. Okay. We begin with Mr. Dogan, last one. We begin with Dr. Rahmani. Over there.
I have a comment and a question for Professor Phillips. First, I want to thank you, the Kurdish Political Research Center, for bringing all these eloquent speakers. And but I have also, I'm Kurd from Rojava, and I represent Kurds from Rojava. They sent me here particularly that tell you that last time we checked, we are Kurds too. So, and we are 12 million, almost combined Kurds of Rojava and Bashur, Iraq. So, but we have been neglected anyway. So also I have a question for Dr. Phillips. You mentioned about situation in Iraq and the decentralization of Iraq. I have done extensive studies there, and I have been there many, many times. And what my question is, there is one part of the equation that I guess you didn't mention, but I'd like you to elaborate on that, that how much the role of the Iranian government is important. Because as far as I know, based on my research, is there are at least 48 different Shiite trained by Iranian organization and militias in active in Iraq, and there are more than 700 sleeping cells of Iranian people, government in Soleimania. So much so that people...
Can I interrupt you there for just a moment?
So,
I have a flight that I have to catch back to New York.
I know. My question is, you did not mention that part of equation for liberation of Kurds in Iraq.
So maybe we can take the other questions quickly, and if you make them questions rather than statements.
Question for Dr. Phillips, please. Mr. Kurdi. Dr. Phillips will be leaving, so if you have any question for him, please go ahead and ask.
Yeah, Dr. Phillips, my name is Fazal Kurdi. I am leading one of the NGOs here, Kurdistan 8, and between time and time, actually monthly basis, I'm teaching at the State Department and Department of Defense for those people that are leaving US, go to overseas. To go back to the independence and referendum in KRG, Kurdistan, Iraq. The structure of Iraqi Kurdistan, if you work on the referendum or independence, no matter what, every single Kurd is dreaming about the independence. But here's the question, or here's the comment. Every single political structure or state structure has to be built on a base on security and stability. In KRG, security and stability is based on a two militias. It is not based on the structure of the government.
Sorry to interrupt you. Would you please ask your question?
I have a comment. It's a comment. Once you have a baseline, you have to have a couple pillars to put on these bases, and then you can put your roof on it. One pillar is rule of law. There is no single rule of law in KRG. Number two is governance. Actually, I can say that there is also no governance in KRG, and economic development, as we speak today, tomatoes and cucumber comes from the neighboring country. If you owe $20 billion on your oil revenue or on the economic, on which base you are going to do referendum and self-rule Kurdistan?
Okay.
That's my question. I have a question also for, actually a comment for Ms. Lucy.
Can we please, excuse me, if you have a comment, hold on to it. Let those people who have questions come forward, please, because he will be leaving. Kurdi, please.
I'll get back to, yes.
Yes, you can come back later. Question, please, and make it clear and concise. We'll come to you.
Thank you. My question is to Dr. Phillips. Do you see, from your perspective, any slowdown within the US government against YPG, YPJ, PYD, or overall the Kurdish issue? Because yesterday I listened to Senator Graham, and I really did not like what he is talking about. And also, what do you see about this future potential presidential candidates and their views regarding Kurdish issue?
We have also another question from Mr. Dogan.
My question will be for Dr. Phillips. Doan from Canadian Kurdish People's Congress. Dr. Phillips, out of 4 divided and occupied Kurdistan, which part, the solution for which part do you find most complex? And what is your view, if you could elaborate on the solution of Kurdish people, Kurdish conflict in Turkey specifically? Thank you so much.
So let me try to answer those questions before I make a mad dash to the airport. Yes, Iraqi Kurdistan needs to develop its state structures. It needs to improve its governance. We established a task force on state building in Iraqi Kurdistan that I directed. It was led by Ambassador Nancy Soderberg. Other notables were involved. I would refer you to that because in the areas of governance, security, economy, and the humanitarian crisis, we explored in great detail what needs to be done. As a matter of principle, Iraqi Kurdistan will receive more support if it functions and acts like a legitimate state. It's taken big steps in that regard since I first visited in 1992. There's more that has to be done. So what's the most complex problem? Clearly the most complex problem for the Kurds concerns Turkey. Now, Turkey has been a NATO ally. The U.S. is in a bit of a conundrum. It doesn't want to be put in a situation where it has to choose between Turkey and the Kurds. Increasingly, the Kurds are demonstrating their great value to the U.S., not only on the battlefield, but also because Kurds and Americans share values. And as I've said often, because Turkey is increasingly Islamist, authoritarian, and anti-Western, if NATO were being established today, Turkey would not meet the criteria for membership. On the role of Iran, we talk a lot about Kurds in other countries. We often forget about the Kurds in Iran. We also don't address the influence of Iran in the region. We should recall that during the period leading up to the Iraq War of 2003, all the Kurdish parties had headquarters in Tehran. The first planes to land in Erbil after the attack by ISIS were not US C-130s, there were Iranian transports. So Iran bears considerable influence, and its influence shouldn't be ignored. Since the US and Iran now have entered into formal cooperation through the nuclear accord, there should be efforts to explore other areas of cooperation between Tehran and Washington, including on regional issues, such as Kurdish concerns. The last question had to do with presidential candidates. I'm not really able to address this except to say that none of the presidential candidates want to be talking about Kurdish issues or Iraqi Kurdistan now. And there's a reason for that, because there's nothing good to talk about. But I promise you that as soon as the president-elect shifts from being a candidate to having a transitional policy planning process, the first topic on their list of concerns will be the potential declaration of independence by Iraqi Kurdistan and critical political and security decisions that the U.S. has to make. So for now, I don't think we're going to learn much from the candidates about their views, but events will require them to have a policy towards Iraqi Kurdistan. So we'll see during the transition period between November and January exactly where they stand. To the extent that we can raise our voices at conferences like this, in other fora, in the media, through what we publish and the ideas that we share, we have the opportunity to shape U.S. policy. I can tell you that over the past years, the U.S. has clearly developed a greater level of sympathy and cooperation with the Kurds in the region. I salute the heroic defenders of Kobani for what they did there. And let's not forget that the defenders of Kobani were Kurds across the region. From Iran, they were Peshmerga, they were YPG, and they were PKK. And the U.S. provided weapons and air support. So clearly, U.S. policy is evolving. The decision to provide direct budgetary support to the Peshmerga announced last week is a measure of that shift. If we keep working together, if we keep raising our voices, if we keep organizing, we're going to see this policy continue to evolve. And I'm grateful to all of you for your efforts, for being here. It's an honor for me to participate, and I apologize for my departure, but I have my family waiting for me in New York, and I'm obligated to return, so I will leave the discussion to you all. So thank you all.
Very good.